Hi, Zest here. The Great Atomic Bamboozle, a general's confession, an honest soldier in an edifice of absurdity. If history is the first draft of myth, propaganda is its polished leather-bound edition. Enter Brigadier General Crawford F. Sams, doctor, officer, reluctant magician's assistant in the greatest smoke and mirrors act of the 20th century. General Sams, that rarest of military specimens, a man cursed with both competence and candor in equal measure. Here was an officer who committed the cardinal sin of taking orders seriously while retaining the dangerous habit of thinking for himself. In 1945, fresh from witnessing humanity's latest exercise in organized mayhem, he found himself appointed to help rebuild occupied Japan, a Japan reduced to splinters and starvation. His mission? Regenerate a shattered health system, and though he didn't know it yet, help stage manage the legend of the almighty atomic bomb. The theater of national collapse. The good general arrived in the land of the rising sun to discover it had temporarily become the land of the barely surviving anything. Cities were smashed to kindling. Millions wandered homeless and half-naked, scouring rice paddies like desperate ants. As he so eloquently put it, we had about 2.5 million, roughly, as I recall the figures, homes destroyed from the bombing of the cities. They had been short of food for several years because of the naval blockade. What Sams encountered was not merely defeat, but defeat with all the theatrical flourishes. Disease roamed the ruins like a pack of stray dogs. Typhus, smallpox, dysentery, all thriving because bathing was a forgotten luxury, and lice were the only creatures multiplying faster than misery. He continued with the sort of clinical poetry that only a medical officer could provide. This movement of people from the bombed-out cities into the countryside for food, and those who had been evacuated from major cities for protection, and so on, trying to get back into the cities, was like a bunch of ants going all directions. It was the ideal situation for major epidemics to develop, and they already had started when we got there. Typhus was being carried by lice, transmitted from one to the other. They were all lousy, because in that kind of a situation, people can't take baths. They had only the clothes on their backs, and so we had a tremendous outbreak of typhus. Smallpox. We had, of course, the usual typhoid outbreaks, and dysentery, and so on. Diphtheria. The country was paralyzed. So, as the cities were knocked down, they actually cleaned them up. They instructed people on insect control, and actually did rodent control, because we had typhus and so on. This is a kind of nation down on its feet, and I had to build up and establish a nationwide organization. Hospitals, a tragic punchline. The pharmaceutical situation was particularly choice. The nation's doctors had apparently discovered that baking soda was the universal cure for the human condition, as Sams dryly observed. I had to take what they called 10-bed hospitals and abolish them, because many people were dying. These half-trained people, the second-class doctors, were trying things in surgery in a 10-mat room, and so on, and people died. Likewise, analysis showed that most of the drugs used, because the patient always got 3 days of medicine, was baking soda, either in powder form or liquid. For almost every disease, that was the major drug they were selling, about 150 yen for 3 days' medicine. One can only admire the elegant simplicity of a medical system that had reduced the entire pharmacopoeia to sodium bicarbonate. Children were wasting away, some collapsing from diseases so exotic they had to be redefined. One of the problems I had was nutrition in the children. Many of them had been subsisting on sweet potatoes for quite a time. They were undernourished and so on, and highly susceptible to things like TB and terms of resistance and whatnot. They even had a disease called ikiri. Ikiri literally translated means cholera. This actually, we found, was not cholera, but was a case of children who had inadequate calcium. They would get bacillary dysentery or whatnot, and they'd die very quickly, much like a cholera case. They would fall down, were usually dehydrated, and they'd die. If hell had a waiting room, it looked like this. Sams tried to measure nutrition levels, draft feeding standards, and invent public health for a country that barely had enough health to publicize. Well, in standards of nutrition, and of course, I was responsible then for the level of feeding of all these people, and for setting the nutritional standards, we started nationwide nutrition surveys. Again, something on that magnitude had never been done, in which we actually had teams go and determine what the people were eating, not just what the ration was. Of course, they had gardens in this, but actually what they were consuming, then looking for deficiencies and so on, which we found. Radiation rhapsody. Bureaucracy meets apocalypse. But here's where our tale takes a delicious turn toward the surreal. While Sams fought typhus and famine, American officials had a different priority: inflating the atomic bomb's reputation to biblical proportions. There arose a great clamoring from various American experts about the mystical properties of atomic radiation. Scientists, generals, and professors lined up to sell the notion that Hiroshima was an irradiated wasteland where even the cockroaches wore lead aprons. As Sams recalled with evident amusement, they had all these groups, and we had just this one to get into monitoring radiation levels and all that. We had the usual furor. When I was first in Hiroshima and landed this group, on the radio some professor from Columbia was saying that anybody who got into Hiroshima in the next 50 years would die of radiation. We'd get this nonsense all the time. The hysteria was magnificent in its complete disconnection from observable reality. Our general, being cursed with that troublesome affliction known as empirical observation, found himself dealing with, you get the extremists. You get a lot of theoretical physicists, or a lot of radiologists who said, "Oh boy, genetic effects are going to be so-and-so for this." Sams tried to inject sanity. I had to do the same thing with the atomic bomb when I came back. It's all right to put out propaganda, but don't believe your own propaganda. That's what happens too often in this business. That's why you had the hysteria about this radiation thing up here. General Sams was one of the first Americans to arrive in Hiroshima after the bombing. Without much choice, he was being turned into a propaganda tool. He was ordered by the president to play up the devastating effect of the atomic bomb under the aegis of an ostensible deterrent against war. The original deterrent against war after WW1 was air power. That didn't work. Of course, they never had any intentions for deterring war. After all, they were the military-industrial complex, not the war deterrent complex. Besides, when were nukes ever a deterrent? What the atomic bomb really deterred anyone else from starting wars against nuclear powers. It never deterred America from starting them. Korea, Vietnam, Iraq. The list grew as steadily as defense contractors' stock prices. The Soviet Union, too. They, too, displayed aggressive actions from Hungary to Afghanistan. Ditto for Russia's ongoing war in Ukraine. Nukes as a deterrent was a lie, merely a selling point for a post-war agenda. Yet even in 1945, we encounter one of those exquisite moments of human folly that reveal the theatrical nature of politics. Sams received what amounted to a script from the highest levels. The president's order to Sams made clear what mattered most. I mentioned deterrence against war. There was a letter brought over by this first group that came up to Japan from the Philippines with me, from the Manhattan Project, in which the president was looking for a new deterrent against a future war because air power had failed. If you have another war, air power will destroy civilization, and it failed because it hadn't even brought Germany to its knees. A strategic bomb survey over there showed that military production had increased, actually, during our bombings. So the object of this instruction, called Letter of Instruction, was you will play up the devastating effect of the atomic bomb. The administrative approach to mortality was particularly inspired. Washington had decided every Hiroshima survivor's death must be chalked up to radiation. If you lived through the Hiroshima bombing, but died 6 months later, you died from radiation complications. Died from untreated burns? Radiation. Malnutrition? Radiation. Run over by a bicycle? Radiation. As Sams explained with the matter-of-fact tone of a man describing office procedures. So I was the one who set the deadline this time. Anybody who had been in Hiroshima and died within 6 months, whether they got run over by a bicycle or whatnot, would be credited to the atomic bomb. We had to set some kind of order to this. Most of the casualties occurred, of course, from thermal readings. Designating all post-war Hiroshima deaths as caused by radiation was a cold, calculated crime. Totally egregious. The true effect? Fear. The true casualty? Truth.